I grew up in a narrow two-story house on Cedar Lane in Portland, Oregon. The house had pale siding that never quite stayed clean, no matter how often my mother washed it. The porch boards creaked in winter, and the kitchen window rattled when the wind came off the river. It was not a beautiful house, but it was dependable. My father, Robert, liked that word. He said dependable things lasted longer than pretty ones. I believed him because the house never failed us, and because I learned early that being dependable meant you were needed. My mother, Elaine, kept the home running with lists taped to the fridge. Grocery list, chore list, reminder notes written in blue ink. I was the child who followed those lists without being asked. I folded laundry evenly. I packed lunches the night before. When something broke, I found a way to fix it or figured out who to call. No one taught me to do this. It came from watching what happened when things were left undone. My younger brother, Daniel, was different. He was loud and charming and always had a story ready. When guests came over, he sat in the center of the room. People laughed at his jokes. They asked him questions about school, sports, and plans. I sat at the edge, refilling drinks, listening. When people described him, they used words like natural leader. When they described me, they said helpful. After college, when my parents started a small healthcare support company, it felt natural that I joined. The company began in a rented office near downtown Portland, above a bakery that filled the stairwell with warm smells every morning. At first, we had 4 desks and 1 printer that jammed every day. My mother handled phone calls. My father managed finances. Daniel came in and out talking about ideas. I stayed and worked. I built the scheduling system because no one else wanted to. I learned compliance rules because mistakes there could harm real people. I talked to clinics in Seattle, San Jose, and Sacramento, listening to their needs and fixing problems before they grew. I created spreadsheets that tracked every detail. I stayed late, sometimes until the streetlights turned on outside the window. My salary was $64,000 a year, steady and modest. I did not ask for more. I believed the company needed stability. Daniel was paid more, though his role changed often. One month he was a salesperson. Another month he was strategic. My parents said he needed room to grow. I told myself I did not need a room. I just needed space to work. At family dinners, the company was always discussed. My father talked about expansion. My mother talked about the image. Daniel talked about vision. I talked when asked, which was rarely. When my name came up, it was usually attached to a task. She handles that. She knows the systems. She will take care of it. I did take care of it. I handled software licenses. I signed vendor agreements. I negotiated contracts that required careful wording and patience. I learned which partnerships were fragile and which ones could last. I created safeguards that protected service delivery even if leadership shifted. I did this quietly, not as a plan but as a habit. We moved into a larger office building by the river when the company grew. Glass walls. Clean lines. A reception desk with our logo behind it. Daniel's name appeared on the website as operations lead. My name appeared nowhere. When I noticed, my mother said titles were not important. She said everyone knew my value. I wanted to believe that. I told myself that if something worked well, recognition would follow naturally. I believed effort was visible. I believed stability spoke louder than words. At night, in my small apartment near Beaverton, I kept working. Checked emails. I updated the documentation. I prepared reports no one asked for but everyone used. I ate dinner alone most nights, simple meals because it saved time. I slept lightly, always ready for the next call. I watched how praise moved through the family. It flowed toward noise, not effort. Toward confidence, not consistency. I noticed it without resentment at first. Then with confusion. Then with quiet understanding. The company reached a point where leadership discussions began. I heard about them secondhand. My parents talked about succession at home over coffee, assuming I already knew my place. Daniel would lead. I would support. That was how things had always worked. One evening after a long day, I walked through the office alone. The lights reflected off the empty desks. The systems were running smoothly. Schedules were correct. Reports were accurate. I realized that much of what made the company function was invisible. It lived in processes, agreements, and trust. I did not feel angry. Felt clear. I understood then that being dependable meant people leaned on you without noticing the weight. It meant your work disappeared into normalcy. It meant you were essential but rarely acknowledged. I did not confront anyone. I did not complain. I simply kept records. I documented what I built. I ensured things were legally sound. I separated responsibilities cleanly, always in the name of best practice. I did not know yet what would happen. I only knew that I could no longer confuse silence with loyalty, or invisibility with peace. That was the beginning, even though nothing had changed on the surface. The house on Cedar Lane still stood. The company still grew. My role still looked the same. But inside something shifted. I stopped waiting to be seen. The retreat was held in a hotel in Denver, Colorado, the kind with long beige hallways and conference rooms that all smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and burnt coffee. Outside the windows, the sky was wide and pale, and inside everything felt planned and tight. I arrived early like I always did, and helped set up the projector because it was flickering. No one asked me to. They never did. The room filled slowly. Staff members took seats in neat rows. Clients sat near the front. My parents stood together, whispering. My brother, Daniel, walked in last, wearing a new dark suit that still had sharp creases. He looked confident, relaxed, like he already knew the outcome of the day. When the meeting started, my mother took the microphone. She spoke about growth, legacy, and the future. My father nodded beside her, hands folded. Then she said the words that made the room change shape. They were announcing a leadership transition. She said it smoothly, like it had been discussed for years, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Daniel would take over operations. He would become the public face of the company. He would lead us into the next phase. The room clapped. I sat still. No one looked at me. No one paused to explain how this would work. No one mentioned the systems that kept the company running or the partnerships that made expansion possible. They talked about vision, confidence, and image. I thought about schedules that could not fail, licenses that had to be renewed on time, and clinics that trusted us to show up without excuses. When the applause ended, Daniel stood and spoke. He thanked our parents. He talked about innovation. He said he was honored. People smiled at him as he had already proven something. I felt calm in a way that surprised me. After the meeting, people gathered in small groups. Some congratulated Daniel. Others talked about travel plans. I packed my notebook and laptop slowly. When Daniel finally came over, he hugged me and said quietly, "I hope you're okay with this." I told him I was. The words came out easily. They were not a lie. They were a boundary I had not yet named. That night, back in my hotel room, I did not turn on the television. I sat at the small desk by the window and opened my laptop. The city lights outside were steady and distant. I did not cry. I did not replay the meeting. I worked. I reviewed contracts first. I checked which agreements were signed by the company and which were signed by me personally. Over the years, I had done this carefully, following best practices. Some partnerships required a specific compliance officer. That had been me. Some software licenses were registered under my credentials because I had set them up when no one else wanted to learn how. I made a list. Not out of anger but clarity. Then I opened folders I had not looked at in a long time. Documentation. Compliance records. Vendor emails. Everything was clean. Everything was current. I realized how much of the company lived inside systems that were invisible during speeches. I thought about why I had separated responsibilities so carefully in the first place. It was not because I distrusted my family. It was because people depended on us. Clinics, patients, staff who needed their schedules to be right because their lives were already hard enough. The next morning, I emailed 2 partners in Austin and Boston. I did not explain family dynamics. I did not complain. I wrote that I was restructuring operational oversight to ensure continuity of service. I said the people being served would not be affected. I said this was about protection, not control. They replied quickly. They trusted me. Back home in Portland, I worked quietly. I spoke to a lawyer I had used before, someone practical and direct. I explained what I needed. Separate structure. Clean and legal. Nothing dramatic. Just clear ownership of the systems I built. Within days, the paperwork was started. I continued going to the office as usual. I answered emails. I fixed problems. No one noticed anything different. My parents were busy planning announcements. Daniel was busy being introduced as a leader. I was busy making sure nothing broke. I did not feel triumphant. Felt steady. 2 weeks later, the new entity was formed. Had a simple name. No family references. Its purpose was narrow and clear. To manage systems, compliance, and partnerships that protect service delivery. Nothing more. I transferred what was legally mine to transfer. Licenses, tools, agreements that required my oversight. I did it carefully, informing the right people at the right time. There was no disruption. No public signal. The image of the company remained intact. The foundation had shifted. One afternoon, my mother called me into her office. She asked questions that circled the truth without touching it. I answered calmly. I told her everything was in order. That service would continue. That nothing was being taken away from anyone. She looked relieved and confused at the same time. I realized then that no one had ever asked how the company actually worked. They only cared that it did. At night in my apartment, I felt something I had not felt before. Not freedom yet, but room to breathe. I slept without my phone on full volume for the first time in years. I did not confront my parents. I did not explain myself to Daniel. I understood that explanations were invitations to argue, and I was not interested in arguments. The decision had been made without me, so I made mine quietly. What I was building now was not revenge. It was alignment between my values and my work, between responsibility and authority, between effort and ownership. I did not know how or when the truth would surface. I only knew that when it did, it would not arrive as a fight. It would arrive as facts. And facts, unlike applause, do not fade. The public handover was scheduled for early spring in Chicago, held in a rented hall near the river. The building was modern but impersonal, all gray walls and bright lights, the kind of place designed to look important for a few hours and then be forgotten. Cameras were set up at the back of the room. Clients filled the front rows. Staff members stood along the sides, whispering and checking their phones. My parents greeted people at the door, smiling with the confidence of those who believed everything was settled. I arrived alone and sat near the aisle. I wore a simple jacket and carried a thin folder. Nothing about me suggested power or authority, and that was exactly how it had always been. The company logo was projected onto a large screen behind the stage. Seeing it there made me think about how much effort went into creating an image that felt solid, even when no one asked what held it up. Daniel stepped onto the stage to applause. He looked comfortable, like the room belonged to him. He spoke about growth and expansion, about vision and leadership. His words were smooth and practiced. People nodded along. My parents watched him with pride, their hands folded together, their faces relaxed. As he spoke, I noticed small things. Client is flipping through a program and frowning. Another leaning toward a colleague and whispering. These were people who cared less about speeches and more about results. They were the ones who noticed when something changed. When Daniel finished, the moderator invited questions. A man in the front row stood up and asked about compliance reporting timelines. It was a technical question, specific and direct. Daniel answered in broad terms, talking about teams and oversight. The man did not sit down. Another client asked about system access and continuity. She wanted to know who would be responsible if something failed. The room grew quieter. People stopped shifting in their seats. Daniel glanced toward my parents. Then he looked at me. It was not an accusation. It was uncertainty. I stood slowly. I did not feel nervous. I felt steady, the way I always did when problems needed solving. I introduced myself, even though many people already knew my name. I spoke clearly and calmly. I explained that the operational systems, compliance tools, and core partnerships were now managed through a separate structure. I said this had been done to ensure continuity and protect the people being served. I explained that licenses and agreements requiring specialized oversight had been moved accordingly. I said service would continue without disruption. I did not mention family. I did not explain motivations. I stated facts. The room was silent for a moment. Then heads nodded. Pens moved. Phones came out to take notes. My father's face tightened. Not in anger but in recognition. My mother looked confused, like she was hearing a language she had never bothered to learn. Daniel stood still, his hands gripping the edge of the podium. No one shouted. No one accused. There was no scene. The truth did not arrive like a storm. It arrived like paperwork. More questions followed, but they were practical now. Clients wanted to know who to contact, how reporting would work, what had changed and what had not. I answered each one. Precisely. By the time the event ended, the narrative had shifted. The image on the screen was still there, bright and polished. But the foundation had been named, and it was no longer invisible. After the room emptied, my parents approached me. My mother asked if we could talk. My father said it would be good to clear things up. Daniel stood behind them, quiet. I looked at all three of them and felt something unexpected. Not anger. Not satisfied. Just distance. I told them no. Not sharply. Not coldly. Just clearly. I said I was not available for that conversation. I said everything that needed to be said had already been shared. I wished them well and walked away. Outside the air was cool. The river moved steadily, indifferent to events inside rented halls. I stood there for a moment and breathed. For the first time in years my chest felt light. Within weeks, I made changes that reflected the truth I had spoken. I left my apartment in Beaverton and bought a small brick house in Madison, Wisconsin. It sat on a quiet street lined with trees, the kind that changed slowly with the seasons. The house had 2 bedrooms and a narrow staircase that creaked slightly, like it was reminding me that homes, like systems, spoke if you listened. I paid $312,000 for it. No stretch. No risk. I wanted something that fit my life, not something that impressed anyone else. I furnished the house slowly. Table first. Then a couch. I hung one picture in the living room, something simple and calm. I let the room stay empty longer than most people would. The quiet felt honest. Work changed too. I collaborated with people who respected boundaries. People who asked questions and listened to answers. People who cared about systems because they understood who those systems protected. My income increased, but more importantly, my days became predictable. I slept through the night. I stopped checking my phone every hour. Occasionally, messages came from my family. Short, polite, asking for updates or clarification. I responded when necessary, always in writing, always focused on work. I did not offer explanations. I did not reopen the doors. I understood now that clarity often feels cruel to those who benefit from confusion. That was not my burden to carry. The company they ran continued. It looked the same from the outside. The website still shone. The logo still appeared on the glass walls. But the work I did no longer lived there, and neither did I. I had not taken anything that was not mine. I had simply named what I built and placed it where it belonged. As spring turned into summer in Madison, I sat on my back steps some evenings and watched the light fade. The silence was not lonely. It was earned. For years I had carried weight without being seen. Now, even when no one was watching, I stood on solid ground. I no longer attend family meetings. That change happened without an announcement. 1 month I was busy. The next month I was unavailable. After that, no one asked. I send polite messages on holidays. Short ones. Hope you are well. Wishing you peace. Nothing more. I learned that distance does not need to be explained to be real. The company my parents kept still exists. Has the same name and the same logo. The building looks busy from the outside. Inside it feels louder than it used to. Meetings stretch on. Decisions circle without landing. Daniel is visible everywhere. He speaks often and confidently. My parents still believe in presence and image. They believe that if something looks strong, it will become strong. Mine runs quietly. Does not need applause. The systems do their work without drama. Reports arrive on time. Schedules hold. People are paid correctly. Clinics know who to call and get answers quickly. I work with partners who respect clarity. They do not ask me to perform confidence. They trust consistency. My income stabilized at $142,000 a year. I did not celebrate it. I noticed it the way you notice a steady heartbeat. Useful. Reliable. Enough. In my house in Madison, mornings are simple. I wake early and make coffee. I sit at the kitchen table and read messages in order, not in panic. The windows face east, and the light comes in softly. The creak in the stairs has become familiar, like a reminder that nothing strong is silent because it is empty. It is silent because it works. Sometimes, without warning, my mind returns to the old house on Maple Street. I remember the porch boards and the kitchen window. I remember how the house looked solid from the sidewalk. How it held together was because someone paid attention to small things. Tightening screws. Fixing leaks early. Doing work that no one praised because no one noticed when it was done right. I understand now why that house felt like home. It was not because it was warm or beautiful. It was because it was maintained. For years I believed that loyalty meant staying. That care meant endurance. That love meant absorbing weight without complaint. I was wrong. Loyalty without respect becomes erosion. Care without boundaries becomes exhaustion. Love without truth becomes performance. Silence is not weakness. I learned that slowly, then all at once. Silence is often the last tool left when words have been used carelessly by others. Distance is not punishment. It is a correction. Boundaries are not revenge. They are maintenance. I did not argue. I did not beg. I did not list my sacrifices or collect proof of effort. I did not destroy anything. I did not embarrass anyone. I did not take satisfaction in confusion or discomfort. I refused to make my exit a spectacle. I simply took what I built and walked away. That choice changed how people treated me. Some tried to pull me back with urgency. Others tested limits with small requests. A few attempted guilt, framed as concern. I responded evenly. In writing. With timelines and scope. Nothing extra. Over time the noise faded. There are moments when loneliness appears, quiet and brief. It comes when I see families together at restaurants, or when a holiday passes without a familiar routine. I let the feeling exist. I do not chase it away. I remind myself that loneliness is not the same as regret. It is the space left when you stop playing a role that was never yours. Freedom does not arrive loudly. Does not announce itself. It shows up as uninterrupted sleep. As mornings without dread. As decisions made without rehearsing how they will be received. Work that ends at a reasonable hour. Freedom looks like choosing silence over explanation. One afternoon, months after the handover, I ran into my mother by chance at a bookstore in Milwaukee. We stood in the aisle between shelves of quiet titles. She looked older, tired. She asked how I was. I said I was well. She asked about work. I said it was steady. She nodded like she wanted more but did not know how to ask without opening something she could not close. We hugged briefly. It was polite. It was enough. Driving home, I felt no urge to call anyone. No need to narrate the moment. It existed on its own. That felt new. I spend evenings reading or walking in the neighborhood. I know which houses have dogs and which have porch lights that stay on late. I know which trees drop leaves early. My life has become small in the best way. Focused. Intentional. I no longer confuse being needed with being valued. I no longer confuse noise with leadership. I no longer confuse family with access. I understand now that foundations are quiet by design. They do not ask to be admired. They simply hold. The distance I keep is not cold. It is precise. It allows me to stay whole. The silence I choose is not empty. It is full of things that matter. The freedom I feel is not dramatic. It is steady. For the first time in my life, I am not bracing for impact. I am standing where I belong. And that quiet is not absence. It is peace.